You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. We're using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Jill Sitnick, what's up?
Yo, hi Justin, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing so well. I couldn't be better if I tried, quite honestly.
Well, you had an awfully cool background behind you, so I understand that feeling.
That's what's doing it. That's what's doing it right there. I'm receiving all the energy from the mandala in this tapestry.
Absolutely.
So you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, well, so first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Absolutely.
I'm an advocate for MDMA therapy for PTSD because I was privileged and lucky enough to go through the therapy a couple of years ago to heal PTSD from childhood trauma. And I think it's my responsibility and it's my privilege to talk about this therapy that is probably going to be FDA approved August 2024. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here and have this conversation. So what was your experience with MDMA like?
You know, I was a straight-laced 80s gal, thought that the eggs in the frying pan, that's how drugs were. So I was never in the drug scene.
Right.
Fast forward to my late 40s, I lost my partner of over 20 years and wound up having a extended panic attack about 18 months after his passing that I couldn't get rid of. And I went back to my therapist who had helped me with my grief work. And very long story short, I was diagnosed with PTSD from my childhood trauma that, quite frankly, I had always kind of like put in a little folder in my brain of like, just don't open. And she was in the process of, she was training to be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. And so I got to work with her and a guide who was a medical doctor at the time and someone she was mentoring with. I kind of got the Cadillac of therapy services. And after 3 therapeutic journeys over the course of a year, I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis, which in layman's terms means that I was no longer suicidal and I actually saw a future for myself. So that's the story in like a little 2-minute capsule to give people an overview of why I'm chatting with you today.
Wow, that's awesome. 3 sessions over the course of a year, and here we are. Yes. No symptoms of PTSD.
Well, I didn't qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. Right. I would say since then, I've had, emotional episodes and things of that sort, but I was no longer suicidal. Like there's a scale. And at that point, I actually I saw there was a future ahead of me and the universe wasn't out to get me. And I was actually allowed to live my life, which when I started the therapy, I did not believe that to be the case.
Right. No, I totally get that. I've been there myself. And so you've had some emotional episodes. Oh, you mean you're a human? What a terrible thing that is to be a human, right?
Well, I'm always super careful because people are like, oh, you healed PTSD. Right. Life must be amazing. There's capital T trauma. There's lowercase t trauma. And then there's capital T trauma that you don't know exists until something brings it out. So I'm always super careful to be like, yes, this is what I really mean by healing PTSD.
Right. Well, hey, I mean, that's good enough, right? If we can not, want to die and actually have see a future for ourselves, I think that's pretty good. I'll take that, right?
And you know what? It was that level that I said, I need to write this book. I need to tell people because this therapy actually works. And up until that point, I didn't really think anything was going to work, to be honest.
So how long was it post-therapy to the idea of writing a book?
Oh my gosh, it was almost immediate. So just to give you some background, I'm an English major. I was an English teacher for 10 years. I think I've always had a book in me.
Mm.
The end of my third journey, which was very, very powerful and very moving, as I was coming out of the enhanced state, I said to my therapist and my guide, I need to tell people about this because this actually works and there's so much stigma around it. So it was only really a couple of months after that third journey that I made the decision I need to start writing. And that's what I did. I self-published a memoir that goes through, it's like you're in the sidecar with me as I was going through the therapy. I tried as much as possible to like avoid hindsight 2020. I'd done a ton of journaling, like the English major in me, like throughout my therapy. So I could take from my journals.
Right.
So it was pretty quick.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And how long has the book been out now?
Oh my gosh, a couple of years.
A couple of years.
Just a few years, like 2-3 years. I'm terrible with dates. I'm awful. We'd have to actually go, and I think 2020. Look at me, not even
that's more than a couple
of
years.
all the questions I'm not ready for.
That's all right. So as a self-described 80s girl who had no drugs even in the periphery, wasn't even a thing that you thought about. Nancy Reagan, just say no. How did we come to the point? Was it just desperation, or was it like, this is maybe my last resort?
Yeah. So, and just to be clear, it was not Mrs. Reagan that defined my choices. I grew up in a very abusive environment, and my mother was clinically depressed, and I had seen her not only be unsuccessful with whatever she was prescribed for her mental illnesses. I mean, my mother attempted suicide throughout her entire life, unfortunately, but she also self-medicated and with certain drugs, and I saw no improvement there either. So it wasn't that there was this authority saying stay away from drugs. It was that in front of me, I hadn't seen any pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical do any good. So that was really where it was coming from. So when my therapist suggested this, I actually argued with it. Number one, I argued with her that I didn't have PTSD. I had to read the body keeps the score. I was like, do you know who you're talking to? I'm like corporate girl, like, come on. And she's like, you've been in my office for a couple of months now. Come on, Jill. But ultimately, it was MAPS.org, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Rick
She sent me, MAPS. I say it out loud just for people who are new to MAPS.
I feel like anybody that listens to this podcast is probably going to know what MAPS is in general.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, that's where she sent me. She sent me over there. And at the time, they had done the 2 clinical trials where 3/4 of the people going through the trials were symptom free. They hit the diagnostic standard to not be PTSD, have that diagnosis. And Justin, I just got to be honest with you. I mean, I had been in talk therapy with her for a couple of months, and my body was still 1,000% sure I was going to be homeless in a month. My life was going to fall apart. You know, I wasn't sleeping. My heart was pounding. My shoulders were up to my neck. My stomach was upset. And, you know, even she pointed out, you know, you were really not making progress here. And with my grief work, she had been able to see me make progress. And it was the clinical trial information, and it was my relationship with my therapist that I trusted her that, okay, this is a healing modality that could work.
Right. And I only laughed because I relate so much, right? Like I only snicker because like I have been in that exact position where it's like, man, just fuck this. Like nothing is good. Nothing is ever going to work. Like I'm going to be homeless tomorrow. Just survival mode all the time. I get it. Like I resonate with that so much. And I've been there, and what a nightmare that is, right? Like it's not even living at that point. It's really just surviving. It's trying to get to the next day. At some points, it's just trying to get to the next hour.
It's literally one foot in front of in front of the next. Like it's just a series of putting one foot in front. And when people haven't gone through that, it's hard for them to understand it.
Right.
Especially when on the surface, everything is fine. It really does come down to the perspective.
Oh, yeah.
my perspective was trauma tinged.
Yeah, absolutely. It flavors everything that we do. You know, when you have that perspective on life, it's going to pervade every nook and cranny of it until it just eats us alive. And a lot of times people do end up committing suicide because it's just so
we have a problem in our country. Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of experience with psychedelics in my younger years. And for the longest time, I used psychedelics as kind of like, the party thing when I was like really young, teenager, early 20s. And it was probably in my mid 20s that I really started seeing the efficacy of it as a healing modality. And that was 20 years ago now. But, I've been telling people this for 20 years and now finally the research is catching up to what, people have known for thousands of years. I mean, not with MDMA, obviously, because that hasn't been around for thousands of years. But there's these substances that work on the brain in such a manner to increase our neuroplasticity so that we can gain these new perspectives on life.
Yes. And Carhart said, psychedelics, they are the blizzard that covers the ski slope that has all the grooves in it. So
all those old neural pathways. Yeah.
All those old neural pathways, you can start skiing a different route.
100%. Well, it's so nice to hear a success story. It's so nice to hear someone who has been in just such a bottom and just suffering so greatly, and to hear and just see you smiling and you're just full of life. And I love that. And that just speaks to the efficacy of MDMA and of psychedelics in general. They do all this work with ketamine therapy. I think they're doing, still working on the trials with psilocybin and things like that. But they were doing studies with LSD about this, 50 years ago, and when Nixon did the sweeping act, the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, it just killed everything. And we are so far behind. We would be such a healthier country, such a healthier society had that not happened, in my opinion.
Oh my gosh, it is criminal what he did to the mental health care in this country. He didn't know it. I mean, we can't say that he purposely made that choice for that reason.
Right.
But I maintain if any of these therapies had been around, if my mother had had access to ketamine, it probably would have been a game changer. I've had a great life. I'm 53. I've had a great life, even though, it was tinged with trauma that maybe I didn't even realize. But I could have had a much more joy-filled life if this therapy had been around when I was in my early 20s. I mean, it's criminal. It's criminal. Absolutely.
And see, my big issue, as I said, I had a lot of experience with psychedelics when I was younger, but it wasn't in a therapeutic setting. So there wasn't really that other part that I think is so necessary, right? Like if we're not doing the work, so to speak, and we're just taking psychedelics, it's not going to have the efficacy of really going in and addressing childhood trauma and like doing the inner child work and some things that I've had to do just in my own journey. Yeah.
And I think that's important to explain to people, because when I first say, people are like, oh, well, what do you do for a living? And I'm say, well, I write and I speak about psychedelics for mental health. And inevitably, depending on who I'm talking to, I initially get some sort of chuckle like, that must be really fun. And then I get very serious and I'm like, well, not really, because psychedelics for mental health, it's going back and it's dealing with that childhood stuff that caused a whole lot of problems. And it's real work. It's much faster than traditional talk therapy, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's a lot of heavy lifting too. For anybody that's done psychedelics, they know that. It's not exactly a walk in the park all the time.
No, not at all. And
especially when you get into those high doses. Yeah.
You're facing things that, for me, I had, again, that folder in my brain of don't open. Mm-hmm. Opening that folder to start thinking about the immense fear I had of my father, like 1,000% sure that if he was in the room at that time, he would have had his hands around my neck. Like, that's not fun stuff.
No.
But an MDMA journey, calming my body down, let me talk about that stuff. So yeah, psychedelics recreationally are awesome. Psychedelics therapeutically are also awesome. They're just two different things. Right. And I think that you're expressing.
Well, and it sucks that they get thrown in the category of illicit drugs to begin with, because as you and I both know, psychedelics are not an escape. They are going to throw you right into the fray. It's not You're not going to put those things out of your mind when you're on psychedelics. All that hidden stuff, all that closed folder, it's opening up and it's coming right to the forefront. And it's like, oh shit, now I have to actually look at this.
Yes. And if you don't have a safe setting, if you're not in a safe place with people you trust and that stuff comes up, it can be very unpleasant and unsettling. So be careful, folks. Be in a good place with good people.
Setting is everything.
Yep. Yep.
So what as far as the therapy side of it, how did that work for you during the process?
Yeah. So the easiest way to think about this is a medical procedure. Think of it in terms of, and I was an English major, so I keep the percentages super, super easy. Get ready. 40, 20, 40. 40% of the time you're preparing for the journey. And I'm using the word journey on purpose versus trip. I'm using therapeutic journey. So 40% of the time you're talk therapy with your therapist, you're figuring out your issues, you're figuring out what you want to work on. 20% of the time is the actual journey day. And I say day because an MDMA journey can last anywhere from 5 to 8 hours. Same with psilocybin. So it's a day. And then the last 40% is integration. And think of integration like your physical therapy, that you probably have some homework from your therapist or your guide in that. Think about what happened during the journey or what comes up for you. My integrations were very much about childhood memories kind of coming to the surface and me changing the perspective. And so that's pretty much the medical procedure, like the same way you would get ready for a surgery with pre-surgery prep, the actual surgery, and then healing. It's very much the same modality, just using a psychedelic as the medicine and MDMA in my case.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so I'm so, like I said, again, I'm so happy for you, to just be, because I resonate with you so much just because I've been there, just the worst it could get, just like, please just make this stop. I can't do this anymore. Like, I just don't even want to do this anymore. It's not like, and for me, it wasn't that I necessarily wanted to die. I just didn't want to exist at all. That was my big thing.
It was too exhausting, right?
Yeah. It was just so overwhelming. Yeah. Just even trying to just get out of bed and function like a normal member of society was just so overwhelming most of the time. I mean, I would have good days, but most of them were okay. And then some of them were just terrible, like the worst days you could possibly imagine that probably very well. Yeah.
You know how I described it to someone? Imagine a 100-pound rucksack. Well, for me, 100-pound rucksack would get tiring. 100-pound rucksack on your back, running a race, and there's never a finish line. And you're just going. And you
didn't even know you were wearing it.
And you didn't even know you were wearing it. But boy, running this race is exhausting. It's not fun, and there's no end.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an amazing feeling when you finally drop all that weight, isn't it?
Yes. And it takes time. I also really wanted to speak out about MDMA because I think once it gets going in terms of treatment, there's going to be a lot of promises that it's like turnkey.
Oh, yeah.
It's way faster than traditional talk therapy if you really do the work, but it's 1,000% not turnkey. It took me a year, 3 therapeutic journeys, months in between, because I was dealing with a lot of fear. So I'm just always super careful that people understand that you have to put the time in. You really do.
Yeah. And it's not a panacea. I'd like to reiterate that it's not a cure-all. You do have to do the work. And then there, as you said earlier, there is the integration process, which can be difficult. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Integration is a fascinating thing. In the very beginning, for me, because I was dealing with childhood trauma, it was all about childhood memories. And for everybody out there who hates to meditate, I'm right there with you. I'm a D- meditator. I know. My meditation is activity. So for me, when I was walking my dog, that's when a lot of my integration happened. So I'd be walking Sadie, a memory from childhood would come up. My father beating my 230 pound, 6'2" father beating me at 3 years old would kind of come to the surface. And instead of me thinking, I'm so bad or the universe is so bad, suddenly it was like, no, that guy right there, he's the bad one.
Right.
And so that year for me dealing with those capital T traumas was a lot of those childhood memories floating to the surface, and almost like I could look at them like they were on television. My body wasn't reacting. I wasn't scared. And I could look at them with suddenly, it was my late 40s, that adult perspective, and then writing about it and thinking about it more and more to make it more permanent in my brain. That's actually how the healing took place. None of it was lightning bolt. It was lightning bolt to look at those memories differently,
Right.
But to make it part of me, I had to write about it, think about it, talk about it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you really have to solidify that new perspective into your mind. Yeah.
Yes. And repetition, the same way that you need to repeat things when you're learning something, think of it as you're learning how things really were versus how you interpreted them when you were a toddler or when you were a child. And suddenly it makes sense. Oh, I might have to write about this or talk about this a few times.
Yeah. Oh, and just to reiterate, meditation is super boring. As somebody who meditates all the time, it's like one of the most boring things you can do, which I think is like its appeal for me. Like we get so wrapped up in trying to do and trying to achieve and trying to be somebody that it's such a relief to not have to do that, right? It's such a relief to be nobody, so to speak.
I think my guess, and for anybody else who this resonates with, I've stored so much of the trauma in my body. I didn't realize how much I needed to move until I kind of look back on my life and how much activity has been in my life. Mm-hmm. And for me, for whatever reason, my brain calms down and is able to kind of open up when my body's physically moving.
Well, that means
sitting still is what drives me nuts.
Right. Well, like walking the dog can be a form of meditation. Like meditation doesn't have to just be sitting on a cushion. Meditation is anything that we can just become absorbed in. So whether it's playing a sport, whether it's walking the dog, whether it's cooking, whatever, but if we're completely immersed in the activity, it's a form of meditation. And meditation and daily life aren't separate things. So you're a fantastic meditator. You just don't like sitting still.
You know what? I'm so glad you honored that, because I think sometimes people get on this meditation thing and it has to be you sitting on the pillow, and no, there's a variety of ways that you can open up your brain. And so I'm super thankful that you just kind of opened that up for folks.
Well, as a meditation teacher, I feel it's important to kind of dispel some of those rumors, and not that sitting on a cushion doesn't have its place, because it definitely has its place, but that's not the only form of meditation out there. There are plenty of other forms of meditation that have nothing to do with sitting still. Again, daily life and meditation aren't really separate. When it's just bringing that level of mindfulness and attention to everything that we do.
Yeah, being very much in the present, listening to your brain, listening to your mind, listening to that inner voice.
Yep. The inner voice, not the repetitious thoughts that come out of nowhere. Don't listen to those. Tell everybody don't listen to that voice.
Put them over there. Give them their space.
That inner critic voice, you can leave that one at the door. Leave Judge Judy at the door.
Oh, that's great.
No, that's one interesting thing that I've actually found with meditation is I've been practicing now for, I'd say, probably a decade, and I found that with enough consistent practice, I've actually been able to kind of turn off my default mode network. Yeah, so that little voice just doesn't exist anymore, and it's been interesting trying to integrate that. And it's with some new perspectives that have come with that as well. But that's been a relief as well, because I don't know about you, but for me personally, that little voice just never quite shut the fuck up.
That voice has a job to protect us, and boy, does it really work hard at it, right?
It really wants to keep us safe. But you know what? I'm 42 years old and I don't need that voice to keep me safe anymore. It came in real handy when I was 6. But I'm not 6 anymore.
It needs to be released of its job.
Right. I don't. Thank you for your service. You take a break.
Have you run across internal family systems?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what I use, and that little voice has a. I won't describe it here, but yeah, that voice is a part for me, and can't get her to shut up all the time, but sometimes we can have a conversation.
Right. And as long as you can get the voice to actually listen. Yeah. And what I've found is that little voice, the inner critic, is always, it's always just a little worse than the most critical person that we grew up around. You know?
Right? We are so mean to ourselves. We would never say to our best friend what the inner voice says to ourselves, right?
I wouldn't say to my worst enemy the things that my inner voice used to say to me. But as we were talking about, it is installed as a protection mechanism, and it becomes a little worse than the most critical person in our life to toughen us up so that we can handle those people in our lives.
It does. I mean, it serves a purpose. Unfortunately, sometimes it just thinks it's the CEO instead of I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely thinks it's in charge.
Yeah, it thinks it's a CEO, and it's definitely not. Yeah,
calm down in there. Just relax. It's okay. I promise it's okay. Everything's going to be fine.
Right.
It's hard getting to that point, though. It is difficult, and it's for me, it's been many years of therapy and deep trauma work and different healing modalities. And fortunately, I'm able to say today that like I am actually genuinely happy regardless of the circumstances in my life. Like myself, like I am, no matter what the conditions are, I'm fine.
Right.
Yeah. And it was not always that case. Like my happiness was very conditional for many, many years. And to be able to say that like I finally at this place where I am unconditionally happy is nothing short of amazing.
I think most of us, I know for me, most of my life, I ran on external validation to make sure my life was happy because internal was too dangerous. So yeah, that's good. That's some good work that you've done.
I never believed the internal anyway. If the internal would tell me I was happy, I was like, yeah, but look at everything going on. How can we possibly be happy right now? And it's like, yeah. And now it's like, well, look at everything going on. How could we not be happy right now? And the thing is, not much has changed. Like the conditions haven't changed. Like I've changed. And it's just so weird.
The perspective.
Yeah. It's like, it's a new lease on life, honestly. And I'm sure you feel the same way. It's like, oh, I finally get to actually start living.
Yes, I'm allowed to live. There was a good bit of the trauma in me that I didn't think the universe actually. As a toddler, we can't understand that our caretakers can't take care of us.
Right.
So their inability to care for us or their inability to give us what we need, we turn it inward. There's something wrong with me. The universe is against me. Mm-hmm. I'm inherently bad. And when that perspective shifting takes time and it's hard, and nobody wants to really go towards that stuff. I mean, it's hard stuff. And when that starts to shift and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I am on this planet. I've done good things in my life. I think, I think I'm supposed to be here and it's okay that I'm here. And when you start to kind of have that permission to just exist, and the trauma starts to kind of get healed and melt away, it's very powerful. It's not so much about living. It's so much more about being able to allow joy in your life because you're allowed to have joy.
Right.
It's a fascinating process.
No, I agree with that 100%. It's like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to feel happy. I'm allowed to feel joy. And for the longest time, I can agree with you. I felt the same way. It was like, it wasn't in the cards for me. Like everybody else can get it, but for some reason there's something wrong with me and the universe is against me and it's out to get me and me alone,
Oh yeah. Hope is what other people had. I wasn't allowed to have hope. Yeah.
The stories we tell ourselves and the moment that we come to realize that it is just that, it's just a story. We've all had these experiences, everybody has had some form of trauma, whether they realize it or not. There's something underlying within everyone. We've all had a difficult experience, but when we can see it as just the experience, it was a fleeting moment. It was an experience that happened and it's no longer happening in this moment, but we cling on to these stories. We cling on to these memories as if they're happening right here and now. And then we make that our story. And then eventually the story starts living our lives for us rather than us living our lives. And it's like, once we can see that it's just a story that we've been telling ourselves and it's all just thoughts, that's when we can come to a place of peace, I think.
Well, and I think there's something really valuable in the empathetic witness. Like, because there's no ladder. My trauma and somebody else's trauma, completely different lives, it's trauma. Mm-hmm. And why does something become a trauma that is kept in the body versus something that's healed and not kept in the body, and you don't have that kind of skewed perspective. And so much of it is the empathetic witnesses who are there when the trauma is happening to help us regulate our nervous system, help us calm down. And when those structures, I say structures, maybe that's a wrong word, when those people are in our lives to help us move through things, the trauma is greatly reduced. I was in a situation, it sounds like you too, where we didn't necessarily have a lot of support system to kind of help us through those overwhelmingly emotional things that kind of got stuck in our systems.
No.
And so we had to heal them later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was one of those, kids who grew up in a household where they give me something to cry about, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, especially as a man growing up in the South, in the 80s and 90s, I was very much man up. You're not supposed to have emotions. You're not supposed to have feelings. And here we are, many years of trauma and therapy and healing later. I feel like a person for the first time in my entire life. Hooray.
Yeah, you get it. You get it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and the psychedelics and the concept of the way the therapy works with, two adults in the room with you as your subconscious is kind of opening up. Mm-hmm. The opportunity to have those witnesses there to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, everything is going to be okay. I mean, to be candid, there was a lot of reparenting that happened specifically during my third journey. Mm-hmm. And that's what my subconscious needed. That toddler needed my female therapist to say, you know what, it's going to be okay, Jill. Everything's going to be okay. The same way that it would have been great if my mother had been able to deliver that message when I was 3.
Right.
So it's fascinating how this therapy can work.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, and I we have very similar experiences. Like my dad wasn't really in the picture when I was growing up, but my mother suffered from clinical depression, and she was either at work or she was in bed, for a good chunk of my life. And like, she just wasn't present. And my grandmother raised me for many years. We cohabitated with my grandmother for many years, and she was very physically present, but emotionally absent, So it was not a good recipe.
Probably explains your mother.
Yeah,
right?
It was exactly. And my grandmother's mother actually died when she was 4. So she never really had a good model for being a mother. So this is just generational trauma. And it resulted in me finally doing something about it.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? Our paths are the same. I basically said at a very young age, I said, I know I'm not going to be what my parents are. I had no idea in my late 40s it would be this particular road, but the decision of no, this is not how my life is going to go. It's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been such an enlightening and amazing conversation. I'm so happy to have met you and to have had this conversation. It's been so good.
Yeah.
So where do you said you do like public speaking and stuff like that? You're trying to spread the gospel of MDMA therapy, so to speak.
Well, I was a teacher way back in the day. I'm in my happy place when I'm chatting with people like yourself or different groups. Right now I am I've written a memoir. I've written an intention setting workbook to help people getting started. I have a YouTube channel where I'm creating the content that I wish had been around when I was going through the therapy. Right. What are intentions? What is the therapy like? What's MDMA feel like? All that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I have a funny feeling I'm going to get really busy when the therapy is approved. So right now I'm just enjoying my time, relaxing, creating content, chatting with people like you.
Cool. So where can people find your books and what's your YouTube address and all that stuff? We need all the details so people will flock towards you and ask you questions.
There you go. So I am the Journey Sage because I teach about the journey, and I'm the same thing on YouTube, Journey Sage, or you can Google Jill Sitnick. When you type in MDMA therapy for PTSD into a search engine, I should be one of the top hits. So pretty easy to find. And I invite people, come on over, check out some of the content so that when it is FDA approved, they can start to decide whether this therapy would be appropriate for them.
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you so much again for taking this time. I really do appreciate it. And I'm so happy for you and for myself and for everybody else who has been able to work through these these traumatic issues and really get to the root of it and dig it up and get it gone.
Yeah, it's, you know what, it's worth, but I'm sorry, it's work, but at least there's now a modality that for a good percentage of people can really help.
100%. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, peace and love. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.